So the 1970s was one of the boldest decades in film history. Studios took risks, endings were ambiguous, heroes were flawed, and some of the best movies ever made quietly slipped past audiences. Not because they weren't great, because they were ahead of their time. These are 10 criminally underrated 70s films you absolutely need to see. Charley Varrick, 1973. There's a particular kind of 1970s crime film that feels almost invisible. No flashy action, no grand speeches, just quiet intelligence and lethal efficiency. Charley Varrick is exactly that. At the center is Walter Matthau, cast completely against type. Known primarily for comedies, Matthau delivers one of the sharpest performances of his career. He plays a small-time bank robber who accidentally steals money from the mafia. Not millions in fantasy cash, real, dangerous, dirty money. And the film doesn't treat this like an action spectacle. It treats it like a chess match. Every move matters. Every decision has weight. The pacing is deliberate, never rushed. This isn't a movie about explosions. It's about survival through intelligence. Matthau's Charlie isn't a superhero criminal. He's tired, calculating, constantly thinking 3 steps ahead. The film's tone is lean. There's no sentimentality, no unnecessary romance, just tension built from realism. What makes it so criminally underrated is how modern it feels. If released today, it would be praised as a minimalist neo-noir thriller. Back then, it quietly came and went, overshadowed by louder crime epics. But revisit it now, and it feels like one of the smartest American crime films of the decade. Night Moves, in 1975. If you want to understand the existential mood of 1970s America, Night Moves is essential. Gene Hackman plays a private detective hired to find a missing teenage girl. That's the hook. It sounds like standard noir territory, but this is the 70s, and nothing is standard. The film slowly unravels into something much sadder and more disorienting. Hackman's detective isn't cool or romanticized, he's confused, increasingly lost, emotionally disconnected from his own life. The mystery almost becomes secondary. What Night Moves captures better than almost any other neo-noir is moral exhaustion, the feeling that even if you solve the case, you've solved nothing about yourself. The ending is famously bleak and ambiguous, not in a showy way, but in a quietly devastating one. When audiences first saw it, many didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't flashy enough to compete with blockbuster crime films. It wasn't sentimental enough to comfort viewers. Today, it's recognized as one of the defining neo-noirs of the decade. It just took time. The Outfit, 1973. There are revenge movies, and then there is The Outfit. Starring Robert Duvall, this film strips the revenge genre down to its bare essentials. No dramatic monologues, no flashy stylization, just cold, methodical retaliation against a powerful criminal organization. The tone is icy, the violence is blunt and unsentimental. There's no operatic grandeur here like The Godfather. This is crime as business, crime as routine. Duvall plays his character with almost mechanical calm. He's not fueled by rage, he's fueled by principle. He was wronged, so he corrects it. The film moves with quiet confidence, trusts the audience to follow without over-explaining. Scenes end abruptly, conversations feel real rather than theatrical. Why was it overlooked? Because it refused to glamorize its own premise. It's too dry for mainstream audiences, too straightforward for art house crowds, but now it feels like a masterclass in stripped-down crime storytelling. Direct, intelligent, ruthless. Across 110th Street, 1972. Few films capture urban decay and systemic tension the way Across 110th Street does. Set in Harlem, the story follows both criminals and police as a robbery spirals into chaos. But what elevates the film isn't the plot, it's the texture. This is 1970s New York at its rawest. Dirty streets, moral compromises, racial tension simmering beneath every conversation. The film doesn't preach, it doesn't offer easy heroes. The cops are flawed, the criminals are desperate. Everyone feels trapped in a system larger than themselves. And then there's the tone. Gritty without being sensational, emotional without being manipulative. The soundtrack alone became iconic years later, sampled and rediscovered by new generations. But the film itself deserves equal recognition. It was ahead of its time in portraying structural injustice without simplifying it. That complexity may have limited its mainstream appeal back then. Now it feels prophetic. Electra Glide in Blue, 1973. On the surface, Electra Glide in Blue looks like a simple story about a motorcycle cop in Arizona, but it's anything but simple. Robert Blake plays a small-town officer who dreams of becoming a detective. When he gets his chance, the illusion begins to crumble. The American landscape in this film is breathtaking. Wide desert highways, endless skies, yet the emotional world feels suffocating. This is a film about disillusionment, about realizing that the system you admired isn't what you thought it was, about the quiet erosion of idealism. The ending is one of the most haunting of the decade, tragic, understated, and thematically perfect. It doesn't shout its message, it lets it linger. Audiences in the early 70s weren't sure how to categorize it. It wasn't a traditional cop thriller, it wasn't pure character drama. It existed somewhere in between. Today, that ambiguity is its strength. It feels poetic, meditative, almost European in tone, and deeply, deeply human. The Yakuza, 1974. There's something quietly hypnotic about the Yakuza. On paper, it sounds like a straightforward East meets West crime thriller. An American private investigator travels to Japan to rescue a kidnapped girl and becomes entangled with the Japanese underworld. But what unfolds is far more restrained and far more emotional. Robert Mitchum plays his role with world-weary calm. He isn't a swaggering action hero, he's a man carrying history, particularly a complicated romantic past tied to Japan after World War II. The film isn't driven by gunfights, it's driven by obligation, honor, and cultural tension. The script, co-written by Paul Schrader, is fascinated with codes. The American individualist versus the rigid honor system of the Yakuza. Violence erupts, yes, but it's sparse and surgical. When it happens, it matters. What likely kept the film from mainstream success was its patience. It refuses to simplify Japanese culture for Western audiences. It lingers in quiet conversations. It trusts silence. Today, that restraint feels refreshing. The cross-cultural respect, the melancholy tone, and Mitchum's understated performance elevate it beyond genre. It's not just a crime film. It's a meditation on loyalty and regret. Who'll Stop the Rain, 1978. By the late 70s, Vietnam had seeped into American cinema in complex ways. Some films tackled the war directly, others explored its psychological aftermath. Who'll Stop the Rain does both, but indirectly. Nick Nolte plays a Marine returning from Vietnam who agrees to smuggle heroin back to the United States. What begins as a criminal enterprise slowly spirals into paranoia, betrayal, and moral collapse. The film feels sweaty, restless, tense. There's a constant sense of dread. Not from action sequences, but from inevitability. You know these characters are moving towards something ugly. The Vietnam War isn't just a backdrop, it's a psychological scar shaping every decision. What makes the film underrated is its refusal to glamorize crime or romanticize rebellion. The counterculture optimism of the late 60s is gone. In its place is fatigue and cynicism. The mood is heavy, almost oppressive. But that weight is intentional. It captures a very specific late 70s disillusionment, when the American dream felt cracked and uncertain. Cisco Pike, 1972. If you want to feel the fading pulse of the 1960s, Cisco Pike is essential. Chris Christopherson plays a former musician turned small-time drug dealer, pressured by a corrupt cop to sell a large stash of marijuana within a limited time frame. The setup feels like a thriller, but the execution is soaked in melancholy. This is less about crime and more about lost momentum, about a generation that once believed in revolution now stuck trying to survive. Christopherson's performance is weary, reflective. He's not hardened, he's tired. The film drifts through Los Angeles with a hazy realism. It doesn't rush. It lingers on conversations, on music, on moments that feel authentically 70s. What likely hurt its impact at release was its subtlety. There are no explosive set pieces, no shocking twists, just mood. But decades later, that mood is the point. It feels like a time capsule, a portrait of counterculture aging into compromise. The Laughing Policeman, 1973. Before procedural dramas became sleek and formulaic, there was The Laughing Policeman. Walter Matthau appears again here, this time as a San Francisco detective investigating a mass shooting on a city bus. The title suggests irony, but the film itself is anything but playful. It's methodical, patient, grounded. The investigation unfolds piece by piece without dramatic shortcuts. Detectives follow leads that go nowhere. Conversations are messy, progress is slow, and that realism is what sets it apart. There's no glorification of police work, no tidy hero moments, just professionals trying to solve something horrifying within the limits of bureaucracy and human error. And when it was released, audiences may have found it too subdued, too procedural, too serious. Today it feels remarkably modern, a blueprint for grounded crime storytelling decades before prestige television adopted the formula. It respects the audience's intelligence, and that respect gives it longevity. The beauty of 1970s cinema lies in its willingness to take risks without announcing them. These films didn't shout, they didn't demand attention through spectacle, they trusted character, atmosphere, moral complexity. And while some were overlooked at release, time has been kind to them. Because when you strip away trends and marketing cycles, what survives are stories that feel real. The 1970s understood that, and these films prove